So can you tune a naturally aspirated engine? Is it worth tuning a naturally aspirated engine? And what are the best mods? So this video is going to look in depth at tuning your naturally aspirated engine to allow you to make the maximum power from your project. Hello, I'm Wayne from TorqueCars. We're going to have a chat about naturally aspirated engine tuning. I will admit I do tend to focus on turbos, but we mustn't overlook the naturally aspirated engines and the benefits that they offer. That low end torque delivery that they provide, it is just so nice, and I can see why so many people are fans of naturally aspirated engines. So how do we make more power on a naturally aspirated engine? Well, bear in mind that a naturally aspirated engine is sucking air into itself. The more air it can pull in, the more fuel it can burn. So you really want to increase the efficiency of the engine. Now, most naturally aspirated engines are about to the mid 80%. So we're still not talking about anywhere near as efficient as a turbocharged engine. In fact, there seems to be an accepted power around about 100 brake horsepower for every 1000 cc's. And the car maker to have achieved near those limit in its production engines is Honda. But when we come to tuning our own engines, we're not constrained with budget, and we can really look at all the options to maximize that efficiency. So first of all, we're going to look at the head of the engine. This is where the air comes in. It comes in through the valves into the cylinders. So the more efficient you can make that route, the better. Now, tuning engines has changed substantially over the years. In bygone times, the intake manifolds used to be of cast iron, very rough, often with seams, and you could do a lot to improve those. In modern engines, manufacturers have been pushed by ever tightening emission standards and have really had to tighten up the efficiency and the manufacturing standards they've used, and they've taken away a lot of the need to do these basic engineering enhancements. So we tend to get engines that are fairly well sorted. So you've probably heard of flowing the head or gas flowing the head, and this is where the chambers in the head itself are optimized to maximize the velocity of the air going into the cylinders. And around the valves you can do a 3 or a 5 angle valve job where instead of having a tube going into the engine, it's slightly tapered on the outside, and it allows the air to rush into the engine and gives you much better atomization of the fuel as it goes in there. And it's a great way of improving the low end torque. I've found engines that I've had the 3 or the 5 angle valve job done tended to make more power at the low end than they otherwise would, and it certainly seemed to improve fuel efficiency. And bear in mind, we are being very simplistic in our approach here. I don't want to get too technical. We're just aiming in this video to give an introduction to tuning a naturally aspirated engine and getting the most from it. So we've looked at the head. The valves is obviously an area where you can improve. Most engines will tolerate larger valves. You can get bigger valve conversion kits, enlarge those inlets, and that will let more air come into the engine. Bear in mind though, with all of this flow of air, that larger sizes don't always flow better. Velocity usually slows up where you've got a bigger volume to work with. So you do need a little bit of knowledge as to what you're doing to achieve the maximum power. It's certainly not a job that we can just do with DIY tools with a haphazard methodology. We need to approach it with a professional flow bench, and we need to deliver measurable results and measurable improvements with getting the air into the head of the engine. Now, when it comes to actually timing the opening and the closing of the valves, the camshaft is the thing that does this for us. It's basically a big stick with egg-shaped lobes on it, and those egg-shaped lobes directly open the valves and close the valves according to whatever durations you require. So changing the camshaft in most engines is probably the most significant power gain you can get, especially when talking about a naturally aspirated engine. It changes the nature of the engine and allows the engine to have longer to suck in more air and can improve the volumetric efficiency. But a camshaft needs to be matched with other mods, particularly the timing and the mapping, to get the maximum benefit from it. You could use a vernier pulley which allows you to rotate the cams very slightly, and effectively that allows you to push the power band to where you want it. Having those valves open earlier or later will determine whether you get the power at the low end of the RPM range, the mid range, or the upper range. And with a lot of modern engines, you've got variable valving control systems that do a lot of this for us. So the newer an engine is, the lower the benefits you'll get from optimizing the camshaft profile. And with engines like Honda with their VTEC system, you've effectively got two cam profiles already built in. So the best way of improving power on those is to get the VTEC mechanism to kick in at a lower point in the RPM range, so you get that maximum cam profile coming on much sooner. So when it comes to tuning a naturally aspirated engine, we would think about remapping it just as we would with a turbocharged engine. So what are the typical gains that you get when you remap a naturally aspirated engine? In most cases, you'll get about 10 to 15% more power. The newer an engine is, the lower the benefits will be, because the manufacturers have already optimized it to get the maximum fuel efficiency and power out of it already. But there are a few anomalies there. Do your research. Our site's a great place to go for scanning our articles and finding out little areas and little tips that we've picked up over the years. And you can see where you can make improvements to your car or your engine. Now, the exhaust headers, the engine has burnt the fuel and it's got to get rid of those exhaust gases as efficiently as possible. So changing the headers that take the exhaust from the engine into the exhaust pipe can make a difference on most engines, particularly around the catalysts. They tend to be a bottleneck that chokes the system. So fitting a sports cat which flows better, if it's legal to do so in your area, is a great mod and will generally free up the potential power of the engine. So with a lot of mods on a naturally aspirated engine, you're just looking to remove restrictions to allow the engine to work as efficiently as possible. So we've discussed the exhaust improvements around the headers. There's not usually a lot of benefit with a cat back exhaust system other than the nice sound that you get. So if you want the nice exhaust sound, by all means go for it, but don't expect just a cat back to give you much power. There's very few cars we've ever seen power gains with a sports exhaust. And the same is true of induction kits. Most manufacturers provide decent air filters and intake tracts. Modern intakes are usually moulded out of plastic and they're machined to fairly high levels of tolerances. So in most cases you'll be hard pressed to improve the intake. But a lot of that depends on how far you go with your tuning, because if you're making a lot more power, you've probably created a restriction in the intake or the exhaust. So the induction kit, the intake headers, the exhaust headers are all ways of removing that restriction and freeing up the power that you've got from those new mods that you've just added to your engine. So what is the flywheel? Well, it sits on the engine. It's usually part of the clutch assembly and it is a huge metal rotating mass. Why would you have a big heavy weight attached to your engine? Surely the effort it takes to turn it is just a complete waste of time. In a reciprocating piston engine, there is a lot of vibration. The nature of the engine itself just means that there's lots of additional vibrations. So the flywheel actually helps to smooth out some of those vibrations. Otherwise, when the engine tick over gets low, it'll just stall. You remember when you were growing up, you used to have those toy cars with a little flywheel in them and you used to rev them up and then let them go, and that energy that was stored would keep the car going. And it's very similar in a conventional road car. The momentum from the engine rotates the flywheel and that mass keeps everything operating smoothly. When you lift off the throttle, you'll notice that the revs decrease very slowly. If the flywheel was lighter, that rev decrease would be much, much faster. And you notice that when you hear a sports car engine, the rev changes are very, very quick. Now, on a road car, you really want the economy that comes with having a flywheel and gradual changes. When you come up to a hill, you want the car to keep its momentum going. If you fit a lighter flywheel to your car and you hit a hill, you're going to bog down, you're going to lose a lot of that momentum, and you really will have to press the accelerator harder to compensate for that to keep the car travelling up and down the hill. So there's advantages and disadvantages to going with a lighter flywheel. Are lighter flywheels ideal on all cars? Well, there is an optimum weight for the performance of your car. So you really want the revs to be changing quickly, but not too fast that it makes rev matching quite difficult when you're changing gear. And you certainly don't want to get that effect where it's bogging down on hills or it's prone to stalling at low RPMs and at tick over. So having some mass in the flywheel is a good idea. Now we're also going to discuss dual mass flywheels because these are quite popular, and it takes the principle of having a single solid mass and it doubles it. There's a second rotating mass that's attached to the first one by means of a spring assembly, and that helps to dampen a lot more vibrations. So those springs take up a lot of the vibrations out of the running of the engine. Now on some engines, like a typical diesel engine or an engine that's just inherently out of balance, a V5 comes to mind, or 3-cylinder engines, you really do need all the help you can get to keep it ticking over smoothly. We've heard from people that have taken a diesel engine, for example, and they fitted a single mass lighter flywheel to it, and they've really ruined the feel of the car. They're not happy with the running and they have to go back to having a dual mass flywheel. So if you are tempted, do chat with other people that have got the same car as you as to their experiences. Our forums is a great place to go to exchange ideas and expertise with other people, so we can all avoid making these same mistakes over and over again. Just because a company is selling a part for your car, it doesn't mean it's a good idea. They're just there to make money, and the advertising brochure will always sing the virtues of these things, and they may work really well in a motorsport environment, but on a road car you've got all sorts of problems that inherently come along with that. So be careful when choosing your flywheel. Generally speaking, most cars will benefit from a slightly lighter flywheel. The engine will feel more lively. The reduction in weight is always a good thing because lighter cars handle better and they accelerate better. So you've got to weigh up all of the pros and cons. So if you want even more power from your engine, there's no replacement for displacement, as they say. So increasing the cylinder capacity of the engine. Now, in a lot of cases, you'll find a manufacturer has a 1.4 litre engine and a 1.6 litre engine, and they use exactly the same engine block. All they've done is change the stroke and the pistons that they've used. So by doing that, you can alter the cylinder capacity of your engine. Increasing that cylinder capacity is a great way of adding more power to your engine and getting more out of it. So do your research carefully. If you can get a stroker kit that adjusts the stroke, or a higher compression piston kit, it'll allow you to make more power. But we would urge you to sit down and work out your project. Don't just start buying parts because they look good in the catalogue. Actually have a plan. Do you really want to increase the cylinder capacity? You could rebore the engine and make the bore size much larger, but you need pistons that match that. That often has a knock-on effect with other components within the engine. You need to look at the crankshaft as well, and also the ignition timing is very important. The last thing you want to do is end up with detonation or pre-ignition, topics we've discussed in other videos. So be careful when you're doing these major mechanical mods to the engine. Now, when you look at manufacturers like Honda, they tend to use very high revving engines, and the engines are very well built and very well balanced. That's really good, and if you've got an engine you want to improve, the best way you can do it often is extending the RPM range. So if you strip the engine down and you make sure that all of the components are balanced, and we're not just talking about weighing the same, we're talking about the rotational balance of the components in the engine, you can raise your RPM without fear of the engine exploding or detonating or destroying itself on you. So it's not usually safe to just exceed the RPM limits that the manufacturers set significantly. There's often a little bit of leeway that lets you just approach that red line and maybe exceed it a little. But if you really want to push past that and free up a lot more power from the engine, getting the engine stripped down and balanced is a great way of doing it, and it'll allow you to raise that RPM limit significantly. So we've talked about mechanical mods and air mods. Now we also need to chat about fuel mods for the engine. Making more power requires more air and more fuel in the correct ratio. So you can't just do those other things to an engine, you need to look at the fueling. Now, most engines have a fuel pressure regulator, and you can increase the capacity of this. It doesn't generally increase power on its own. It usually benefits you in the throttle response. You'll get a faster take up, but having stronger components and being able to tolerate those higher pressures will make the engine more responsive to the other mods that you do, and it gives you a little bit of leeway when you're tuning your car so you don't end up with flat spots or hesitation. Fuel injector capacity is also important. There's a calculator for flow rates that you can use online. So you can look at the cylinder capacity of the engine, the power that you want, and it will tell you what sort of cc capacity the injectors need to be able to provide. And also that usually necessitates an upgrade to the fuel pump in order to deliver the extra fuel to the injectors. Choosing injectors with a different spray pattern can also change the efficiency of the engine and the nature of the way it burns. Lastly, we come to the spark plugs and the spark. Generally, a bigger spark means a more efficient burn. A longer spark means a more efficient burn, but you won't get very much benefit by just switching spark plugs. You'll generally find a better quality spark plug will have a longer life and it'll work efficiently for a much longer period of time than a cheap plug, which tends to get sooted up and fouled up and stops working as efficiently. But don't be swayed by the multi-electrode plugs. You will only get one spark, no matter how many electrodes there are or whatever the plug is claiming to do. It's not going to add power to your engine. It might allow you to make power for a longer period of time before it degrades, and that's generally the approach of a lot of these performance parts. They just allow you to have more headroom to work in. So we hope this video has been useful to you. We've got lots of other videos coming up to deal with all aspects of tuning your car and setting it up, from brakes and suspension to just upping your engine power and turbo conversions. So if you've not subscribed, please do so. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Don't forget, stay tuned.